Hi folks. There's been a bit of a dearth of videos on this channel concerning Linux lately, and it's because I wanted to bring up a particular subject. It's one that I think is a core issue to the kinds of people that will come to this channel to learn about Linux. Haha, it's taken so long because this target has been moving quite rapidly. They say that a moving target is hard to hit, but this one's been moving so rapidly over the last few months that I couldn't even hit it with a blunderbuss. Now I think things are starting to slow down to the degree where it's possible to get a handle on them. And the subject is this: why learn Linux? Why get involved with Linux? And I think that the majority of the audience that are going to come here are going to be coming from a Windows environment, from using a Windows platform. And there are two sides to that argument. Not only why you learn Linux, but why move away from Microsoft. Now, I'm going to be bringing some very complex and long-running situations down into a very short space of time. There's going to be links in the description, and not only that, there are different ways of looking at things. One man's meat is another man's poison, and it's going to be up to you to do your own research on this and make your own decisions. At the end of the day, it's what you want to use, and making a jump like this is no small matter. So, Microsoft has gone through having a number of people at the helm. I mean, many people think Bill Gates when you immediately talk about Microsoft, but actually Steve Ballmer was at the helm for more than 10 years, I think, and now we've got Satya Nadella. I don't really know how to pronounce his name, but he's been at the helm for about 2 years now, I think, even though Gates, I think, is still on the board, and I'm not sure if he ever left the board. The board of directors of Microsoft, that is. Yeah. But with Nadella, there's been quite a different change in direction. Under Ballmer's rule, it was very much the case of Linux is the sworn enemy, the devil spawn and must be destroyed. Under Nadella's rule, yeah, it's a different kettle of fish. But on top of that, IT in general and the commercial attitude has changed quite dramatically. As we know, one of the greatest barriers in the way of profit of these companies has been piracy, illegal use of software. And that is something that has been traditionally very difficult to clamp down on. That all changed a few years ago when Adobe, makers of Photoshop and other bits and pieces like that, moved their software into the cloud. So there was nothing to install on your local system, but you accessed it on their servers. That meant that they had control. They could bill you for however much time you're using the software and the storage, and they had control. It really sounded pretty much mostly the death knell for piracy of their latest versions of the software. They didn't have to release it, it's all on their servers. It is a bit more complicated than that, but at the end of the day they saw their profits double as a result of this strategy, and moving things into the cloud has now been the mantra of many companies, Microsoft among them, with Office 365 and other odds and sods like that. On top of that, you then have data. A chunk of the money that's currently funding the free internet and the services that we're using is ad revenue. Now, the advertising people want to make the most of their money, and therefore we're getting profiled. Our data is worth a lot. There's a saying that if a service is free, you're typically the product. and it's grown to be quite serious in terms of privacy issues, and various people have different views on that. To some people, giving a bit of privacy away for the service that they're receiving in value is a worthwhile trade-off. This is one of those aspects where everybody is going to have their own view. Yeah. So that's another one. Everything has been data mining. Companies and all sorts have been. Our mobile phones have typically been a real problem in terms of this. You can install an application which you click at the click of a button has access to the local storage, to your call logs, to all your contact list and all the rest of it, and just siphons it up to a server somewhere where that information can be sold. Now, there are also other concerns regarding the amount of data and the type of data that can be siphoned off depending on what type of device you're using. As long as about 2 or 3 years ago, articles were appearing which were concerned about data being sold to the likes of insurance companies, so that if you had a particular health issue or something, then it could affect your insurance premiums, and that, things which otherwise wouldn't be deemed possible because the data wouldn't be talking. And but those things are now a possibility in the world of big data. That's where a chunk of concern is coming from. So for some people, the issues of privacy are pretty big. Haha. In the hoo-ha bar, in the section in the description, you'll find a few links. Those are links to Barnacules. Jerry, his name is, and 3 videos concerning a number of things going back a number of months. There's a few things that you need to know. First, he rants. he's a bit passionate concerning this. What Windows 10 is sending back to base, and he readily says a number of things. One, he was a senior engineer at Microsoft for 15 years and was made redundant in one of the Nadella round-off layoffs. I think in 2015, I think he got caught up in that. There's been a number of chunks of layoffs in Microsoft lately as they readjust things. And he also thinks a lot of the Windows 10 platform. He thinks it's actually one of the sleekest, most efficient platforms that Microsoft have ever released. The thing he's not happy with is the privacy aspect. It's one thing having a mobile phone and doing various bits and pieces, but your PC is actually where you are in your little cave at home, and it's got everything on it. It's by far more a more personal piece of kit. Now, there is something to be said for that argument, but then there's another side of that argument, which is with everything shifting to the cloud, it doesn't matter whether it's on your local PC or not. If it's in the cloud, it doesn't matter. But the metrics that Microsoft have been taking up, even as far as key presses, individual key presses have been recorded as generating traffic, network traffic to Microsoft, and that's been a serious cause of concern, which means that even when you type in passwords to banking sites, whatever, it's all been recorded and going up to Microsoft. And Microsoft have been quite silent on how much data they were collecting until recently. The links to all the detail on this are in Jerry's videos, but I've read them, and if you're a non-techie, it's pretty dry reading. But I think Barnacules himself, despite the anger that he's feeling towards a lot of this, does make a lot of valid points, and he does, fair play to him, make the counter points. That there are some people who are perfectly fine with the amount of data that's being collected, and yeah. But Microsoft are herding people onto Windows 10. It's their overall attitude. Not only did they have the enforced updates that caught a lot of people out last year, and despite all their public protestations, they still did whatever they could to force it down people's throats. There is now the issue that Windows 7 and 8 if you're running those on the latest hardware, the latest processors, you will not receive security updates. That has triggered an entire war from people who are trying to trick Windows 10 on those latest platforms to getting the updates. Yeah, that's a cat and mouse run, the cat and mouse game that's still going to run. That is running, and I think it's got some way to go yet, and I couldn't let this video drag on too long before I made it. There have also been various concerns regarding Microsoft's store. Previously, you used to get buy your software from a third party, put the CD in, DVD, whatever, and install the software, or download it from the internet and install it there. If you know Apple, you'll know that they have a store that you download the apps from. If you have Google, you'll know that they have the Play Store that you download apps from. That's pretty much what Microsoft have introduced with Windows 8 and 10. They've introduced a store. One of the things which actually finally pushed my button to hitting the record button today is that Microsoft have released an education laptop to take on the Chromebook head-to-head in the education sphere. And they have locked down the store. They have locked down the Windows Store. In order to install software, you've got to buy it through their store. If you want to unlock that, you've got to pay them $50. And for the privilege of being able to install your own software on it. Now you can actually argue that a number of different ways. Me personally, I think that's a bloody cheek, and is also a sign of things to come. For the consumer side, I think business has always had pretty much different deals, and they've had enterprise versions of software. And yeah, for the consumer side, this does not bode well. So there's plenty of reasons not to be content with Microsoft at the moment. A lot of this stuff has still yet to run. The average consumer has yet to be bitten by a lot of this. And so whether the uprising will happen or not, I don't know. But there's a lot of reason to not like Microsoft at the moment and to want to go to an alternative. And for those who can't afford Apple, or don't particularly like Apple's way of doing things, and don't like the Chromebook's way of doing things, because that's an always-on medium, and yeah, everything's in the cloud again. Whatever your reasons, there's plenty to keep your eye on, you know. And even if you don't exactly want to jump to Linux immediately, there's plenty of reason for you to at least keep your eye on things and be ready to consider a jump in the future if that time comes when you want to do it. So, what the hell is Linux? I'm going to be cutting a lot down here. Now, the whole thing started pretty much with mainframes back in the day, and when mainframes got smaller, there was an operating system called Unix. Unix was meant for what we called mini computers at the time. Now, mini computers were anything other than mini. They'd take up an entire room, and you know, they'd probably easily fit one of these rooms and still need decent power supplies, cooling systems, you know, pretty specialist pieces of kit, but they weren't as big as mainframes, and they used a system called Unix. From that, if you were to actually use Unix, then you'd see quite some similarities between the Unix commands and the commands on MS-DOS, which was the first operating system that Microsoft really came out with. And a lot of the commands you use, and typically, yeah, there is another operating system called CP/M in the middle of that as well. And yeah, I'm cutting a lot of stuff out here. But on top of that then came Linus Torvalds, and he generated a kernel, which is the core of the operating system, the kernel of the operating system, and called it Linux or Linux. You know, the exact pronunciation has been debated and probably will be for some time, and I don't even know if Linus has actually I think he actually has come out with the preferred pronunciation. I don't know, but I think the whole thing is pretty much bigger than him anyway. He's still alive, he's still at the centre of it. I still don't know what would happen to that Linux kernel were he to pass on, who knows. But it was supported by the community, group of people, which is still large, and they develop the kernel. And then what you have is other companies that take that kernel and build their distribution around it. And you'll typically hear some of the names of these companies. One of them is Red Hat. One of them is SUSE, or, well, yeah. And another one is Canonical. Canonical is actually the name of the company. Now, where do these companies actually get their money from if they can't actually, if they're not charging for the operating system, where do they get their money from? How do these companies survive? Well, the reason is a large chunk of the internet actually runs on Linux and Unix and Solaris and other operating systems. And although they can't really charge for Linux itself for their distribution, they charge for support. So businesses that run these operating systems have to, if they want support, they've got to pay for it. And also, if the distribution comes with manuals and all the rest of it, then money is paid for that. So even though you don't pay for the operating system, you're paying for a lot of the support and extras that you need in order to run the system. And that, pardon me, is where these companies typically get their money from in order to keep their distribution running. Now, Canonical is behind one of the particular flavors, the distribution called Ubuntu. Now, a distribution is not only the kernel, but it's also packages. When you install software, typically you can think of it as a version of a store which is free. So effectively, you're just going to the store and saying, give me this software, and it will download it for you. And the distribution, the company for that distribution will organize those packages and keep them running so that they're accessible. And it's pretty complicated. Canonical was actually founded by a guy called Mark Shuttleworth. You can probably look these guys up and get more information, but that's pretty much how some of this stuff runs. Mark himself has a bit of a vision. He's a bit of a visionary, and sometimes those visions pay off, sometimes they don't. But yeah, typically if you're a private user like me, end user, and you're using Linux and you're using a distribution, we're typically running on the coattails of businesses who are paying these companies for support. So that's typically where the money comes from. There's also things like training. So if a company wanted to have its own staff who are to run their Linux and Unix farms, they would be buying support training for those staff, and that's another income. There are a number of ways that these companies can get money, which feeds the whole thing. So yeah, there is money in the background. So a particular distribution consists of a number of different things, and you will find that those things differ from one distribution to another, like the way the packages are handled, for example. And there are other marks down the chain. You know, I think I'm correct in saying that Ubuntu is based on a distribution called Debian. I think that you have the Linux kernel itself. That is then used to create Debian, and Debian is then the foundation of Ubuntu. I think it's Debian. There's quite a number of distributions around, and that's one of the things that I want to go through on this channel, which is the various distributions, the various options, and how they function, because things do get there's a lot of choice at the end of the day. That is both a positive and a negative. With Microsoft and Windows, you get the Windows version and you get the interface that comes with it and the way that everything works, and you know where you are. With the distributions, they're all different, they have their similarities, they have their differences, and it's picking the right one for you, which takes a bit of time and knowing some of the various stuff that's going on here. One of the operating systems the distributions rather, that I've been using for a long time has been Ubuntu. Now, Microsoft are not the only ones that have been embroiled in various, I wouldn't call them scandals, I'd call them issues in terms of direction. But if there's one thing, in that some of these distributions are so small that if they ignored their user base, their customer base, they'd pretty much be committing suicide. So, yeah, there have been a number of issues that have gone on, and Linux is not free of those issues. One of which was Mark Shuttleworth had a vision. That vision was what's called Unity. Now, as well as the distribution itself, with Windows you get the one experience. That's not the same with Linux. One of the things that I'll go into is some of the various desktop environments. So you have the kernel, you have the distribution, and you have your desktop environment around that as well, and you can choose those. You can build them and see the various differences and choose one that works with you the best. That's pretty much one of the secrets to this. I really would advise that if you've got an old machine kicking around and you've got the bandwidth, that you download some of these distributions and give them a run for their money, or see the various options that exist and see if you can find videos of other people using them and discussing those various distributions and the desktop environments. Now, GNOME has been one of the stalwarts of Linux and the various distributions. But Mark Shuttleworth had a vision, which was one operating system across all platforms, so one experience across all platforms, and so he created Unity. Now, Unity started on the netbooks, which is this kind of device, and indeed this is, I think, the first machine that I actually used what was termed the netbook remix on. Now, it's particularly useful for these netbooks because they don't have very big screens, not capable of very much in terms of resolution, and they are limited in terms of processing power. This was back in 2010-ish, thereabouts. So the netbook remix was actually a good way of using the screen size and the screen estate. However, about a year later-ish, he brought that into the main desktop environment and did away with GNOME. Oh boy, it was a very Marmite experience. You either loved it or you hated it. I hated it, and I ended up going to Linux Mint. Now, Mint, just as Ubuntu had been based on Debian, which has been based on Linux, Mint was another distribution which was built basically on top of Ubuntu. But indeed, the repositories still used Ubuntu's repositories. So if you went for a package, it said, "Give me OpenOffice," it would download them. It would download them from Ubuntu's repositories. So later on, Unity also appeared on a mobile phone. Not surprisingly, Mark Shuttleworth, about a week or so ago, said, he announced quite suddenly that he'd have to eat his carrots, which is a reference to being a child that doesn't want to eat the food, some of the food that's on the table that's deemed healthy and all the rest of that jazz. But quite suddenly he ate his carrots and killed Unity, and the process is going back to GNOME. We'll see where that leads, because it's going to be in a future distribution. So, overnight, pretty much the mobile phone died. I still don't know what's going to happen to netbooks, not that very many people are using them now, because we now have the, not the netbook, what the heck is the term for it? Notebook, I think. Ultralight, there are different terms. But now we have machines which are smallish, light, give us reasonable battery power, reasonable processor power, and a good screen size. So netbooks are pretty much out the window now. We don't need them. We can use a full desktop operating system on a light, mean machine. So, what's going to happen is one of the very important questions, I think, that has yet to be answered. But that is what will be happening on this channel, is that I take a delve into some of these things and we go into them. Because he's now put his cards on the table, and yeah. Where to go? Typically I think one of the important things to realise is that distributions are based on other distributions, and that there's a bit of a lineage on them, that there are different experiences you can have, and there's quite a bit of tailoring options. And to anyone coming into Linux, that can be one of the main things that trips them up. What do you do? What am I going for? What's this? What's that? How does that look like? Oh, that doesn't look... Yeah. You're faced with those sorts of questions, and it can be a bewildering array to try and make a choice from. Yeah. So, we'll be looking at a few of these things. Where things go in the future, who really knows? If there's one thing that people will know from using Windows for many years, is that things have changed. Every few years there's another interface, another way of doing things. Everything's reorganized and all the rest of that jazz, and some systems, some programs won't work anymore on the latest version of whatever. And that has not changed with Linux. It hasn't changed with many other operating systems. Apple's iOS has gone through various iterations, and again, older software typically won't work. You won't totally leave that behind with Linux. Change is the only constant, and Linux is no exception to many of these rules. Linux is a slightly harder operating system to hack and get into trouble with, but it is still vulnerable. I think one of the key things that I think, you'd have to check me on this, but on the pawn to own competitions, I believe that most often Microsoft Windows is the first one to fall, Apple is the second, and Linux is the third. The pawn to own is basically when there's some very nice hardware put up, and if a hacker can get into it and hack it, then basically they walk off with that expensive equipment. They win the competition. That's what it's all about. And as a result of that, the companies learn about vulnerabilities. So it's worth it from the company's point of view. But I believe that's typically the way. Windows falls first, then iOS falls, then Linux falls. But it falls. Everything falls. And even though an operating system is hard or hardened, that still doesn't absolve the user from operating it correctly. Even the most expensive, intelligent car in the world will probably crash if you drive it badly enough. Even sensors that will stop you driving headlong into another car may not stop you driving off a cliff. There are always bits and pieces to that. So, one of the things is always to check the comment section, because if I've said something wrong here, other people will probably put something in the comments which will put me right or correct something that I've got wrong in this video. And also other ways of looking at things, because that's what we're dealing with here. Many different ways of looking at things. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's a case of what matters to you. I do believe that it's worthwhile watching Barnacule's videos, because despite the anger, he does cover a lot of stuff very succinctly with his particular point of view, and at least in his videos he does acknowledge that Windows 10 is not a bad operating system. It's perhaps the best that Microsoft have ever produced, and that some people are going to be perfectly fine with the kind of information slurping that's going on. I haven't yet heard him talk about the lockdown of the store. I think it may be too soon for that. But yeah, given his experience, I think it's worthwhile listening to what he's got to say, and then sitting back and making your own decision. Yeah. There's various odds and sods going on. I think typically you only may need to watch the first one, which is the latest one. If you really want to know, watch the second one, and the third one I think is probably now some out-of-date stuff concerning how to turn off a lot of the privacy stuff, a lot of the telemetry as it's called, the data that Microsoft gathers from Windows. So yeah, the first thing that I would be doing is, am I comfortable with Windows as it is? Am I comfortable with Microsoft as it is, where it's going, what it's doing? And that's the first question to answer. Once you've got that question answered, then you'll know how much effort you want to put into learning Linux and following the rest of this channel. It's not easy. There are no certainties. Everything is always change, and there's always a learning curve. Yeah. It's we live in very interesting times, to put it mildly. Personally, I don't like the cloud. All my data is local and backed up, but other people love the cloud, the ability to get at that data from anywhere, and yeah, there's different ways of viewing things. So I'll see you on the next video, when we'll probably take a look at I think we'll take a look at the latest version of Ubuntu that I can get down. Yeah, I think that's probably the next thing we'll do. Even though I've been using Linux Mint, we'll take a look at Ubuntu. Yeah, there was another thing where Mark Shuttleworth also caused controversy, which was also on the data side of things, in that there's a search, and one of the things that Shuttleworth did for that search was that those search parameters were being fed out to Amazon, and the results coming back would also have feeds from Amazon. So if you wanted to do a search on your local drive for a particular document name, you'd type that name in, and not only would it search your local hard drive for that document or of that particular name, it would also throw that search out to Amazon and feed back loads of Amazon results in that search for you. Oh boy. It was on by default, and it was forced on. You couldn't switch it off. It was eventually user pressure that forced them to put a switch in it, and then it was eventually defaulted to off, and I think that's the current state of play. It's in there, but it's defaulted to off. A few other things that Shuttleworth did that drove me a bit bananas was there was an Ubuntu One music store, and I was starting to buy my music from there. It was obviously done in conjunction with, I think it was 7 Music or something like that. But there was certain cloud storage, and a certain amount was free. You could pay for more, and if you bought any music from the store, it would be in the cloud, and you wouldn't have to pay extra for that storage. They decided to can it. Why? I don't know. If it was cost implications, I would quite happily have forked over a few quid a month to have that kind of service and to have access to that kind of music store. But commercial decisions being what they are, they canned it. I think they could have possibly done more with it. I think they should at least, personally, I think they should at least have tried a paid version. But yeah, that's typically how it goes. So there's controversies within Linux and Linux communities. You're not going to escape them. It's all a degree of what controversies you're more comfortable with, I suppose. Yeah. So, got any questions, let me know. If you've got any corrections, put them in the comments. And yeah, there are some other links down below. What other links am I putting in? Let's have a look. What links am I putting in? Okay, after reviewing the links, I have precious little. I have the 3 links to Barnacule's videos, 1 link to the new Windows S, which has the restricted store and the extra $50 to unlock it, and then I have a link to an article about Mark Shuttleworth abandoning Unity and returning to GNOME. So yeah, the key thing is to get to grips with how all this hangs together, the difference between the companies, the distributions, and how these choices and the desktop environments all hang together, because that's pretty much what we're going to go through. See you on the next video. Bye for now.